Welcome to the version 1 Microsoft SAM Practice video blog. I'm Carl and I'm joined today with William and Dan. We're going to cover off why most Copilot deployments underperform and the one structural decision that changes that outcome. So from my experience over the last couple of years, I've seen that between 30 and 40% of Copilot seats in unstructured rollouts show fewer than 30 minutes of active use per week at circa $30 per seat per month. That, in my opinion, is not a rounding error. That is a licensing problem with a straightforward fix. William, what are customers reporting right now?
Yeah, well, it's very much the same sort of story. So they have a broad rollout. Everyone above a certain grade gets a license, and then adoption just does not follow. So the tool is there. Most people are just not using it. And when the IT team pulls out the usage dashboard, the numbers are not something that anyone wants to put in front of their CFO.
Dan, in your opinion, why does that pattern just keep repeating?
Well, Carl, it's because of the deployment just didn't ask the most basic question. Does this person's daily work actually match what Copilot does? The tool delivers real value for specific patterns, meeting high meeting loads, heavy document output, complex communication. Remove those patterns and there's no obvious use case. People try it once, it doesn't click, and then the license just sits dormant.
Yeah, that's a really good insight, and the data is consistent with this. The top 20% of users account for more than 60% of total Copilot usage across organizations, and that concentration is not a coincidence. It tells you exactly where the deployment should have started. So, like Copilot, my opinion again, it doesn't fail because the technology is wrong. It often fails because the deployment didn't match the tool to the work that was required. And so that kind of brings us to the next section of this video blog, which is going to talk about the fix and the use of persona-based licensing. Before a single license is allocated, you really do need to define which roles have a genuine high density use case for Copilot and which do not. So we typically work within the SAM practice with 6 personas, and the logic behind each one matters. So the first persona that we typically work with is executives, executive leaders, should I say, CXOs, VPs, directors. Think of high meeting load, high stakes documentation production, constant information throughput, and these users see immediate value from things like meeting summaries, briefing drafts, and email management. And I think, this is a non-negotiable first wave, no further justification needed. The second persona that we see is the good old-fashioned knowledge worker. So think about people like analysts, project managers, legal counsel, HR, business partners, finance managers, the list goes on. And they typically account for between 40 to 60% of your total deployment. They're meeting heavy, they do document intensive work with a clear and measurable return, I would say.
And those two personas definitely generate most of the active usage and critically the internal success stories that make the broader rollout easier. So if customers can get them right first, adoption will build from there.
That brings us to persona 3, which is where a common and expensive mistake often happens from my experience, and that's with regards to developers.
Yeah, M365 Copilot is not the right tool for developers. GitHub Copilot handles code, documentation, verification, and pull request summaries, and it only costs $19 per seat rather than 30. We regularly see organizations paying $30 per developer per month for their tool. Their developers barely open. There's $11 per seat routing error that is completely avoidable.
Yeah. So what have we done? We've got 3 personas so far. So persona number 4, I would classify as field professionals. So think about account managers, sales execs as an example. This, in my opinion, again, is more of a conditional tier with manager sign off required and usage monitored from day one, I would say. Persona 5, I would categorize as operational staff. So these are individuals that we would place into a deferred pool, reviewed at 6 months with real deployment data rather than a guess made up front, which is quite common, or as we often describe it as wish casting. And then persona 6, which refers to frontline workers. And in most cases, not that there isn't a business case for the use of AI for frontline workers, but for Microsoft 365 Copilot, we often find that there's no real business justification for a license. So these roles tend to be structured, transactional type roles. And what we've often found is that Copilot might not necessarily move the needle that much for these individuals. So really important that organizations understand that, as opposed to investing in that licensing fee up front.
Yeah. And I think so the personas, they're not rigid job titles. Someone's actual work patterns determines which persona they sit in, which is why it's objective individual scoring, rather than just categorizing someone by a grade or a function, is important when it comes to identifying which persona a user may actually fit.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I suppose the one caveat to add to this video blog today is we're talking about personas. Each organization will be different, depending on the vertical sector that you sit within. So, that always needs to be taken on board. And that's, you're bang on, William. I think, that's where the scoring model is, what makes the allocation defensible. So Dan, do you want to talk us through what that scoring mechanism can look like quickly?
So there's 6 criteria, each weighted. M365 active usage is at about 25% of the total score. Meeting load around 20. Document creation also around 20. Email volume at 15. Role seniority at 10. And data sensitivity access at 10 as well. Each of scores 1 to 5, final score out of 100. So that puts about you, if you're in the bracket about 80 and above, you're in wave 1, 65 to 79, wave 2, and below 50, you're deferred or no license. The most underlying data area exists within your M365 admin center and Viva Insights. You're not running surveys, you're reading telemetry that's already there.
Brilliant. And I think, the thing I love about the scoring is it removes all the politics, right? And the allocation answer is a number, not a manager's preference or an individual's biased needs, perhaps maybe another way of describing it. And I think one other important point to drop in here is that, like, this scoring, and it can be adapted to the specific needs of your organization, but it isn't a one and done type assessment. You've got to do this on a recurring basis so that you have that constant push and pull of Copilot licenses around your estate, so that you don't have users asking for that software and then finding actually it's not been properly adopted. But again, the scores themselves can identify harvesting opportunities for licenses, but they can also point to where there needs to be a greater emphasis placed on how do you drive that adoption with those users and how do you get those productivity gains. So William, over to you.
Yeah.
Any other tips?
Yeah, that's the way to keep the deployment honest. So for example, if any user is below 30 minutes of active weekly use for, let's say, 30 consecutive days, that triggers an automatic alert to their manager, and that allows either increased adoption training or awareness, or it may be that the license just isn't right for that person and they don't actually need it. And then you have things like no response in 14 days if the line manager is not responding, license suspended, return to the pool, reassigns to the next eligible user, which is part of the deferred pool as that score below 50, for example, that Dan described earlier. And then scores are rerun quarterly, so it's not a one and done, but licenses will always follow the scoring matrix.
Yeah. So last question, what does this look like when it's done properly?
So a successful rollout, we would see about 70% of active use within 3 months. Unstructured rollouts are often below 40% at about 6 months, with utilization above 80%. Your cost per active user stays below circa $30 per month.
And then for knowledge workers who report around 2 hours saved per week by month 6, if you think of 300 active users in that bracket, that's 600 person hours a week redirected to higher value work. And that's the productivity story that your CFO can then act on.
So we're pretty close to the end of the video blog. So at version 1, we run a Copilot license advisory engagement, including three things: right sizing your deployment using your own Microsoft 365 data, building the persona framework and the rollout plan, and setting up the usage monitoring and reclamation process, should I say, that prevents that good old-fashioned shelfware accumulating in the background. If this is a problem you recognize, reach out to us here at version 1 on the website or directly with your account manager. William and Dan, anything you want to add just to close us out?
Yeah, so I'd say that the data to make the right licensing decision is already sitting there in your tenant. So use that data before making the broader company-wide commitment. So let the data do the talking.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Dan, any last tips from you?
Yeah, just match the license with the work pattern. Everything else will sort of just follow from that. So
Thanks both. We will see you on the next one.
Thank you.